Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me, whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, thank you for joining me. I appreciate you watching. Welcome to class today. So this week we're moving on, going on to talk about JavaScript conditionals and loops. And so we do have a lot to talk about when it comes to conditionals and loops. And I'm going to try to spend less time talking and more time demonstrating, which is going to be our goal for today. Right, I do have a bit of a sample site ready to go for us to write some code on that we can kind of have a little bit of fun with. But we're writing conditionals and loops. And so conditionals, they're if statements. We'll look at that in just a moment. Loops allow us to do things multiple times. So, you all should have some familiarity with these concepts from other courses. And in JavaScript, they basically work the same, right? The syntax is just a little bit different. So as we are getting started here, one of the most important things for us to do is just to refresh ourselves on our comparison operators. So our comparison operators are what we use to compare two values, right? And our program or our compiler or our browser or whomever is, reading our coding language is going to look at this comparison and determine a true or false based off of this comparison. So we're going to look at two values. These are our operands, right? So we have the operator, which is the comparative symbol, and the operands being the values that are on either side of that operator, and that could either return true or return false. And there is another instance in JavaScript, which is kind of a little bit weird, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, where something can return true or return false. But our values, our operand values, they can be numerical, they can be strings, they can be logical, meaning Boolean operators there, true or false, or they can be object values. And so when we're comparing strings, based on lexicographical ordering or alphabetical order, right? You need to use Unicode values for those, right? So when we think about that, we're basically thinking about the ASCII chart, right? So like uppercase letters are lower, have a lower Unicode value than lowercase letters. So if you have a word that starts with an uppercase letter, it will come before a word that comes before a Unicode or a word that starts with that same lowercase letter, right? Because it's using that Unicode value of text that we see in the ASCII chart. So if we're trying to sort a list, say, by string values, and we want to do it alphabetically, then we need to keep that in mind, because you basically have two separate sorted lists, one that starts with uppercase letters and one that starts with lowercase letters. So typically one of the things that we would do in that case as well would be to do something before that to normalize the data. Meaning that everything started with an uppercase or everything started with a lowercase or what have you. Right, and so this is our operator chart. And so we can see our different comparative operators. We see equals is equal, right? Exclamation point equal stands for not equal. 3 equal signs is strict equal. So this only returns true if the operands are equal and of the same data type. Right, so we can see that difference there between equal and triple equals, right? When we look at examples returning true, we can see that in JavaScript, we can compare a numerical value and a string value, and it will return true if we just do a direct comparison, right? But if we did a strict comparison, a strict equals comparison, with a triple equals symbol, that means that if one is a string and the other is a number, it will return false. So we also have a strict not equals, right? And in that case, that both sides would have to be different types. Greater than, less than, or equal to, less than or equal to. You know, this is more of a refresher at this point, right? I think we are all sort of familiar with these topics. So what we want to do here, or what we want to be able to do here, is we want to be able to take these statements and put them, and, you know, create a conditional that's going to allow us to do something, right? So with these values, we can look to see, okay, well, you know, what's going on? What are we doing here? If this is true, then we can do this. Otherwise, we can do something else. Right? So we want to be able to look at a condition, make a comparison. If it's true, we do the thing. Right? So I've got us a site here. Right? Just some simple HTML, CSS, JavaScript. I'll go ahead and pull up what this site looks like at the moment. There currently is not any JavaScript. Here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little form field with a value. So we're going to add an input type equals text and a little button for a submit button. Right, just so we can see an event taking place here as well. Right, so now our site has a little form field where we can enter a value. And we can hit submit, and that submit will trigger an event. And we can do something from there. So I think what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to change the color of my H1s depending on the value that gets put into that checkbox. Right, so let's go ahead and just write some code to refresh ourselves based on last week with events. That will get that value from that checkbox. All right, so let's write ourselves a function. We'll call it getValue. And if we wanted to have multiple calls of this function, right, we could use an argument here. But we'll call this function getValue. And all it's going to do is we're going to document .query selector input .value. And so we're just going to pass this into a variable. So we'll say let x equal, or let val, or let's go let v equal document.query selector input.value. And then we will log that value to the console, console.log v. And so then if we take this function and we add an event listener to it, that would be connected to our button. Then whenever we click that button, it would get the value out of that text field. And for now, log it into the console. Right, so what I want to do is I want to document.query selector button .add event listener. This is going to be a click listener. And we're going to run the getValue function. So whenever I click that button, it's going to get whatever the value is inside the input, and it's going to log it to the console. All right, so if we look at that, let's go ahead and load up our console here, inspect element, check out our console. And so we can click this button with nothing in it, and we can just see we get no value there, right? There's no value coming out, but we can see that it's giving us something. If I put a value in there, like say 1, When I click that button, I get a 1. If I put something in there like, say, 2, I get a 2. Right, so let's write ourselves a conditional that will look at the value and change the color of our H1s. And I want to do it for all of my H1s. But for now, we'll do it for the first H1. I want to do it for all of my H1s, but we'll need a loop for that. So we'll do it a little bit later on for all of our H1s. So we'll start out here with just the first of our H1s. Now that we know that that works. Now we could do multiple things here, right? One of the things that we could do is we could take this value and pass it off to another function, which might be smart. So let's write ourselves another function here. Let's write ourselves a function. We will call it change color. This will take a value input. We'll call it val here. And we'll write a conditional statement. So we can use like a modulo condition check here, so we could get something sort of similar there. For the time being, just so we could see it work, we could say something like if val equals 1, document query selector h1 style color equals red. We'll keep it simple for the time being. Right, now we'll put our function call here inside of our get value function to our change color. So that would be change color with the argument of v. Right, so now when we click this button, that will trigger this get value function, which will get the value from the value box, take that value, pass it off to this change color function, run a conditional to check the value, and if it's 1, then it'll turn it red. All right, so we can check this out here. So if we put a 1 in this box and we hit submit, we should expect that first one to turn red there. If we put a 2 in this box and we hit submit, we should see that nothing happens. So if we put a 1 in this box and we hit submit, and then we put a 2 in this box and we hit submit, without refreshing the page to reset the colors, it's going to stay red. So what I might want to do there is to take any other value and change it back to black. Right? So we can do that with an else condition, just like we would with any other programming language. And document.query selector h1 style color equals black. So now if we put a 1 in that box and we hit go, it will see that 1 and it'll replace the value. If we put anything else inside of that box, like say 3, it's not 1, so it'll turn it back black. Right? We could probably see that even better if we made it a different color, like say blue. So that way it would start black. We hit a 1 and it turns red. We hit a 5 and submit and it turns blue. Right? So that demonstrates what we want there out of our condition. All right, so let's just see what happens if we make this a strict comparative operator. Right, if we put 3 equal signs in there. So if we check this out here, we come here, we put 1 in here, and we submit, it turns blue. And so why does it turn blue? Right, well before it was just a regular comparison. And so it can take an object, it can take a string, it can take a numerical value, compare it against another numerical value or string of like type, And if it's the same, it's fine. Right? But now we are basically taking a string, which is the number that we put in the box, and we're comparing it against a number. Right? This is a number here. So in order to fix this, to actually get it to work with our 3 equals signs here, we would have to do some typecasting, the way that we would have in Python or any other language, to get this comparison to work. Right, and so there is a parse integer function that would do our typecasting here for us, which is really what we want to be able to do. So if I were to parse this integer as I passed it, parse int v. So now we're sending the integer parsed version of whatever gets put in. Then it is able to make that comparison. So if I put 1 in here, it turns it red, because it's parsing that integer. But if I don't parse that integer and I'm using a 3 equal sign strict comparison, it's going to turn it blue. So now it's only going to look for me to hit in the number 1 here. And if I put in anything else, it's going to turn it something different. Right? And so we see comparison operators there as well. And so in that sort of way, our conditions are relatively easy, right? Like, I don't want to spend a ton of time on them. There's like other stuff in the module that you can see that's in there that goes through this stuff. So I primarily just want to focus on doing some just some demonstration here and spend less time talking about it. Right. In fact, let me pull up. I want to refresh myself on what I'm asking you all to do in the lab assignment for this module, so I can do some examples based on that as well. So let me just pull that up really quickly on another monitor here, because these are our conditionals and our loops. All right, so it's awesome amusement. Yeah, the for of loop, so we can do an example of that. That'll be nice. What we just did there sort of is an example of, taking a value from a form and putting it in. So that's the Ronald's brother thing. Nice. Yeah, so the other thing I want to talk about here is truthy and falsy. Which is a bit of an interesting concept in JavaScript. So when I'm dealing with JavaScript, truthy and falsy, basically anything in JavaScript can be a true or a false value, which is kind of interesting, right? So if I wrote something like, say, let's make a function here, and let's call it background color. We'll call it BGC, like that, and it's fine. And so in this function here, we're going to set the background on DOM content loaded. So what I want to do is I just want to do this really quickly to show you all how truthy and falsy work, right? So we run this function. We're going to run it on. We're going to use our DOM content loaded event, and we are going to basically just say if some value, and we'll change that value being, we'll start it off with if true, right? Because that's an easy one to understand that it's true, a Boolean true. If true, we're going to document dot body dot background or dot style dot background color equals let's make it like a pink, okay? So let's go with like FF CCCC. Make it a nice bright pink. Boom. And so, of course, a Boolean true is a true value. Right? So if we add an event listener for this, document.query selector, or actually I can just do document.add event listener because I'm doing it for DOM content loaded. So when the document's DOM content loads, we are going to run BGC. Right, so now we see we've got a pink site. Right, because true is true. Well, what else is true? Well, in JavaScript, any truthy value, I can get a true result for any value that isn't false, zero, empty set, null, undefined, or not a number. Everything else can be true, right? So if I put something in here like if 78, right, without any comparison operators, right? Note that I'm not saying if 7 is greater than 8. I'm just saying if 78. 78, an integer value, is a truthy value in JavaScript. So I can save this, and my website will still be pink, right? If I put something in here that was false, like 0, 0 is a falsy value. So in that case, my website is no longer pink. Right, so we could even do something like that if we were to maybe make some changes here. We can kind of see different values that are pink versus, or that are truthy versus different values that are falsy. So I'm going to comment out this one. I'm going to comment out what we have here. And I'm going to modify our background color function here to work on this. And so actually I could still do our initial, so I can use this event listener here because we'll still do this get value call. We'll just change it to what it calls from there. So val. And we'll say if val, then we'll do this thing. And so now instead of change color, which we will just comment this out, I should put that on the outside of the semicolon. We will do BGC V. Right, so we can do that instead. Right, so let's see how some different things change our site. right? And so everything that we put in here is actually going to be truthy. I guess we could just submit nothing, and that's going to be falsy. But if we put any sort of value in here at all, that's going to be truthy. So if we clear that out, nothing is falsy. We don't have anything set up to change it back, so we should add an else condition there. Else document .body.style .background color equals white. Okay, so now if we enter a truthy value, it'll make our pink background. So say U, just the letter U, a single character, that's truthy. But if we clear that out now, which is really the only thing that we can enter in here, that would be falsy. It's going to turn back to white. So empty arrays, empty associative arrays, empty or objects, strings. I could even put a, we saw that there with a U. Numerical values, positive or negative numerical values, anything that is not false, 0, an empty string, which is how we're able to reset the site here, undefined or not a number, basically, NaN, the NaN value. Is going to be false. Everything else is going to be true. Right, which is sort of interesting. Like we had a similar problem with some scripts because we kind of weren't realizing what it was doing. And so it was checking a field. There was a conditional that was checking a field, and it was basically if value, like this sort of truthy falsy. And so if the field was completely empty, like we see here, that's going to be falsy. But if it's got a space in it, well, a space is a character. A space is a Unicode character, so now it's truthy. So that's going to turn the color of my site. So if it looked like an empty field, but it had a space or some other sort of value in it, it would return true instead of false, as it intended to, which is a problem, right? So this is just another way that you can kind of handle things, right? Me personally, I don't use truthy and falsy properties of things very often. Unless it really helps out the situation, I typically just allow I just make direct comparisons using conditional statements. And just let that be what it is. Right, so that kind of gets us to a good point with conditionals. Let's talk briefly about loops. And one of the easy loops for us, which is a for of loop. So I think I've done demonstrations. Let me just check here, just so I can see. Yeah, we've got content in the module showing you the while loop, showing you the for loop. So I just want to spend a little bit of time. We'll make this one a little bit shorter today and just talk about the for of loop here, because it really makes life a whole lot easier. Right, so one of the things here is that, when I was doing this part here, this gives me, when you're using query selector gives you the first value of a type on a page. Right, so query selector here on input gives me the first input on the page, which just so happens to be the text box. In this example here on line 9, query selector H1 gives me the first instance of H1 on the page. But there are some times when you don't want the first instance, you want all instances, right? I want all H1s to change color. Or I want all paragraphs to be something. And so we can do that, right? So let's take our paragraphs as our example here. Right? We have spans inside of these paragraphs, but I think we can work with paragraphs just directly. I think it'd be fine. So let's write ourselves another function, and we'll call this paragraph style. We'll call this paragraph style. And we will do our open close curly braces. Right, so I want to write some styling rules here that will apply to not just the first one, but all of my paragraphs. And so in order to get a list of all of your paragraphs, we're going to use query selector all. So we're going to say let paragraphs equal document.query selector all p. And then we will console.log paragraphs. Now what query selector all does is it returns all of the paragraphs on the page, all of the paragraphs that are in the DOM, in an array. So you can't style things in the array, right? You have to loop over the array and style the different elements of the array differently, right? So if I add a little document dot add event listener on DOM content loaded, and I run paragraph style, we should be able to see this array of paragraphs in our page on page load. So if we look at our console here, inside of our console, that's interesting. That should be showing me my console. I'm sure there is a typo or something here that I've missed. That should be showing me everything. That's strange. So let's just add another console.log to see if this function is triggering. And then if it's triggering, we can troubleshoot. Okay, well, it did it that time. Because I have a node list here of 3 paragraphs. That was weird. Maybe I had just forgotten to save? Yeah, because now it's definitely just showing me my node list, because right there it is. Right, I had written it right, I guess. So it gives me this node list, which is an array of nodes, and it shows me my different paragraphs, right? I have this paragraph, and this paragraph. 3 paragraphs that are on my page. What's interesting, right, is that I can actually separate this with a comma and get other things, right? So if I wanted all my paragraphs and all my H1s, I can create a list of that as well. So now I have a list of all my paragraphs and all my H1s through this query selector all. Right? We can see here 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's an array length of 6. Now these are all in an array. Right? So I can't style this array directly, right? Like if I said, like if I came into this code and I said something like paragraphs dot style dot color equals green, that's not going to work, right? Because paragraphs is an array. It's not an element in my DOM. It's an array of elements in my DOM. So if I look at my website here, it might even just have an error here for me. Yes, it does. Green is not defined, which that should be in quotes. So that's a good catch there on behalf of my main man, the console. But now it's telling me cannot set properties of undefined to have a color, right? Because that's an array. Right, so what I need to do here is I need to loop. And when we have an array of this type, the best way that we can loop over it is a for of loop. So I can write something kind of fancy here, and I can write for paragraph of paragraph. And am I confusing language? It might be. It might just be. Oh, this is JavaScript. Yeah. Colon is, I think, Python. So for paragraph of paragraphs. And so you can see here, paragraph is a new term. This is just, so the word paragraph here could be anything, right? We could call it text. We could call it P. We could call it whatever we want to. But it is a standard sort of for of syntax to be able to say for singular of plural, right? And so that's what we're doing here is we're basically saying for singular of plural. So this is going to loop through that entire array. And in this case, it's both H1s and paragraphs. But it's going to loop through this entire array, and we can just add styling in here accordingly, right? So we can say paragraph dot color or dot style dot color is green. Right, so notice I'm referencing the singular here, because essentially what I'm doing is I'm going through my array, and for every singular item in the array, we're doing the same thing to it. So now every H1 is green, every paragraph is green. Right, that's because we did both here, right? If I took the H1 out here, now it's only selecting all paragraphs. And so now only my paragraphs are green. And if I enter my number here, my background color still works. All right, so let's comment out this console log here. Well, now what can we do with this, right? Now that we know that we have this power. What can we do with this? Well, what if we were able to get the number of the item in the array? So what if we went through and we console.log paragraphs dot index of paragraph. Let's see what that does. That could be interesting. Whoops. Yeah, paragraph dot memory, come back to me. Index of dot call, maybe? I am kind of going off script here just a little bit. Oh, my memory is escaping me, so we'll just do something different. Because technically what I was thinking about there, I would do better with a regular like for loop anyway. So let's add our H1s back into this list. So we can get everything on the page green. And might be interesting to do a string slice. Let's try that. So if I said console.log paragraph -1, get the last character of the string. Let's see what that returns. So let's check console. And we have 6 undefined elements. Okay. So let's add paragraph dot text -1. Or is it dot value? Or you know what? I could just look. I can just look at the console. I would just do that. What I want to be able to do is I want to be able to get these H1s. I want to be able to look at the text inside of these H1s. And I want to get that last character that's inside of there. So if I console.log paragraphs, and that's going to show me my node list. I should be able to look in here and see where that hello works. So it's inner text. So that's what I'm looking for. So if I went and I console.log paragraph.inner text. All right, and this is just another good way to troubleshoot as well. Then that should log all of my text, which it did there. And if I look at the character in the -1 index location, and it would help if I hit the minus button. Then, ooh, we get undefined. Interesting. But if I put 0 in there, is that turning it as a string? Yes, it is. This might be me confusing programming languages again. We could probably try the last index. I need that sliced. I need that sliced to do -1. That's what I need to do. Yeah. Yeah, that is me confusing programming languages again. So if I do that, I should be able to get the last character of the string. Boom, there it is. So now I can look at 1, 2, and 3. And we can run a conditional off of that. So we can say something like if paragraph dot inner text dot slice -1 equals 1, paragraph dot style dot color equals red, else if paragraph dot inner text dot sliced -1 equals 2. We could make that paragraph dot style dot color equals blue. We want to do another else if here because remember the paragraphs, the P's are also in there as well as the H1s. So if it's 3, we'll make it, let's go with an orange. And then we'll put this statement here to make all the paragraphs green inside of our else condition, like so. So now we've made an array of all of the paragraphs and H1s on the page. We've looped through that array of paragraphs and H1s. We've taken a slice of each paragraph of the last character and also H1, right? Because that's included in the list. So since our H1s are heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, or they're Hello World 1, Hello World 2, Hello World 3, they got that number at the end of them. We can check to see if that last character has the number. If it does, we can style the heading differently. If it doesn't, which all the paragraphs would be that, we can style it green. And then we end up seeing something like that. Right, so this is a big deal. And so this is all that I really want to cover today, right? I think this kind of helps get you over the finish line to getting to where you need to be with your lab assignment. We'll go ahead and stop here. We'll wait for questions here, and while we're waiting for questions, I'll go ahead and push this to GitHub. And so this is already in an initialized get parent folder, so this would be get add period. Get, and I actually want to get, I want to go up a level. So I want to cd pop up, get add period, get commit -m loops and conditionals example. And we can check the, let me pull up my GitHub here. Make sure I'm on my right branch. Here we go. On the master branch. I don't remember what we called the remote here. So we can run get remote -v to see what we called that. So it's origin. So this should be get push origin master. And there it goes. Good, good, good. And now I have a JSCon and loops folder that I can share with you all on GitHub and GitHub pages. So we'll get that out to you as soon as possible with the recording of today's live stream. Since we're not seeing any questions here, that we'll just go ahead and wrap it up. Say that that's all I have for you for today. Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next time.